Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. I am your teacher Simi Naber, and today I'm here with a new lecture. I hope everything is going well at your side and you must be enjoying at home. Let's start today's lecture. This is my lecture number 20 for grade Prio. Today we have a history class and we have already started chapter number 6. I'm going to start my lecture with the topic the Morley-Minto reforms, which was the British attempt to win the Indian support, and this is on page number 58. Let me give you a glance of the previous lectures in the class that was like by 1909. Great political consciousness was seen amongst the Indians, and political parties like Congress and Muslim League had emerged. And I've told you even the reason why Muslim League had was started, and because Congress was the only party which was like representing the whole of Indians, in native Indians like Hindus, Sikh community, and Muslims. But then Muslim realized that they should have their own political party, and they started with Muslim League, All India Muslim League. Then British were affected by these parties, both Congress and Muslim League, and all previous British attempts were failed, and they realized that in order to introduce new reforms, they need to impoverish the grievances of the Indians. They need to cater these two well-known political parties. Let me introduce the two British officials who actually drafted these reforms. And the first one was the Lord John Morley. He was born on 24th of December in 1838, and he was the Secretary of State for India. And he was died on 23rd of September 1923, one of the chief leaders of the reforms of 1909. And among all these reforms, one was the Morley-Minto reform. Another personality was the Lord Minto, and he was actually the Viceroy of India, and he replaced Lord Curzon in 1905. He was the grandson of the former Governor General of India, and he had faced two assassination attempts and the attacks to kill before he became the Viceroy of India. So here's the background of the Morley-Minto reforms. In 1906, Lord Morley, the Secretary of State for Indian Affairs, announced in the British Parliament that his government wanted to introduce new reforms for India, in which the locals were to be given more power in legislative affairs. With this, a series of correspondence started between him and Lord Minto. The then Governor General of India, he was Lord Minto, and a committee was appointed by the Government of India to propose a scheme of reforms, and the committee submitted its report. And after the approval of Lord Minto and Lord Morley, the Act of 1909 was passed by the British Parliament, and the Act of 1909 is commonly known as the Minto-Morley reforms or Morley-Minto reforms. So the main terms of the reforms were like the Imperial Council was increased to 60 members by adding more non-official members. Non-official members mean the members who were not holding any position in the government. However, the British retained control, like they kept the control by ensuring that the majority of members were officials and therefore appointed by the British only. So the Central Executive Council was increased by adding 60 new members. 60 new members. The council could discuss matter of importance and advise on government policies, including the budget also. And the third one, like providing provincial councils were also increased to 50 members. And even the number of the members of the provincial legislative was also increased. It was fixed as 50 in the provinces of Bengal, Madras, and Bombay, and for the rest of the provinces, it was just 30. So the members of the provincial councils were also increased, and that was from to 50 members, which was previously like 50 members in the larger provinces and 30 in the smaller provinces. Then Muslims representatives to the councils were elected by separate Muslim only electorates. So right of separate electorate was given to the Muslims. That was the main concern of the Muslims, but Hindus were not happy with this decision. Because separate, let me tell you what separate electorates are. I have even explained in the class. In the case of separate electorates, the voting population of the country or region is divided into different electorates, into different groups, we can say. All the groups were based on certain factors such as religion, caste, gender, and occupation. Here, members of each electorate votes only to the elected representatives for their electorates. So here it meant that the only all the voters, all the electorates were the voters. They were exclusively Muslims, and even the representatives were exclusively Muslims that were reserved for the Muslims. So that was we can say a good effort by the British to grant a good say in the government for the Muslims. In elaboration, I want to tell you that the members of the legislative councils were permitted to discuss the budgets, suggest the amendments, and even to vote on them. The Secretary of State for India was empowered to increase the number of the executive councils of the Madras and Bombay from two to four, and two Indians were nominated to the councils of the Secretary of State for Indian Affairs, and the Governor General was empowered to nominate the Indian members of his executive council. So the Congress reaction for the Morley Minto reforms were like Congress was divided into two factions or groups: the moderate group or the extremist group. The moderate agreed with the reform, saying that it has saved the country from any kind of anarchy and chaos. On the other hand, the extremists were not in favor of these reforms, especially they were against the separate electorates for the Muslims. On the other hand, Muslims were delighted. Their reaction was different. On the contrary, the All India Muslim League welcomed the Council Act of 1909. The League passed a resolution which offered cooperation with the government for the success of the reforms in the Delhi session in 1910. As a conclusion, in spite of all its demerits and flaws, the reforms contributed and offered space for political development. The inclusion of the Indians in councils was a great experience for the Indians. They became part of the legislative councils. In the constitutional evolution of India, the Act of 1909 was a decided step and opened the door for real politics. But the most important consequence of the reform was the acceptance of the separate electorates for Muslims. The Hindus argued that this act was totally undemocratic, and they started a resolution which was known as the annual resolution for the end of the separate electorates. But Congress failed to understand that British had no desire to establish a democracy in India. Instead, the British only wanted to make as few concessions as they were necessary to bring stability in India. So both Hindus and Muslims had set up their own political organizations, and were campaigning for their greater rights and demands. British needed to react to these demands. The demand of the Hindus was to reverse the partition of Bengal. Just how vital it was for Muslims to form their own political organization emphasized in 1911 after this demand of the Muslims, when the British showed that they could not be trusted to protect any rights and interests of the Muslims. So the new viceroy at the time was Lord Hardinge, had reversed the partition of Bengal, and it was decided, and the decision was announced at Darbar in Delhi in December by King George V, who was on visit in India at the time. The British tried to suggest that they had reversed the partition as part of their policy in governing India, but in reality, they had been forced into to move by their fierce opposition by the British Hindus. However, the British also moved the capital from Calcutta to Delhi to show the Bengalis' opposition had not been um, completely successful. The reversal of the partition was bitterly opposed by the Muslims, and but the British just British was they were not concerned with any of the Muslims' concerns. The Muslims now decided that they should move away from the Hindus after even having the reaction of the Hindus for the partition of Bengal, they decided to move away from any kind of the Hindus' demands. So, the partition of Bengal was reversed again in 1911. And the main reasons were like the surrender in front of the protest and demonstrations, law and order situation in India. Some of the economic reasons were there, like boycott of British goods and the Swadeshi movement that was started by the Hindus. The Swadeshi movement was a part of the Indian independence movement and it was contributed to the development of Indian nationalism. This movement was started by Indian nationals who were exclusively Hindus in 1906 against the partition of Bengal because Muslims were delighted with the decision, but the Hindus were totally disappointed. It was one of the most successful movement against British rule. And this Swadeshi movement was launched in the early 20th century, and which was a direct consequence of the British India government's decision to the partition of Bengal. And the two main goals of the movement were like the use of Swadeshi goods. Goods means local goods, native Indian goods, and the boycott of the foreign made goods, especially the British goods. So some of the British measures that proved ineffective, restrictions on the print media and public gatherings, imprisonment of the leaders, activists sent into exile, and these kind of all acts taken by the British forced the Indians towards the Swadeshi movement, and to which even British was forced to reverse the partition of Bengal. India before the First World War. The reversal of the partition of Bengal had led to poor relationship between the British and the Muslims again. Because of these reasons, like the Muslims saw the reversal of the partition as a betrayal of British promises that the original decision of the partition was final. They also soon realized that the parliamentary reforms did not provide Indians with any genuine voice in the government of their country. And despite the attempts to work with the British since the days of the Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, the Muslim now lost faith in the British to allow them any real political power. So in 1912 and 13, the British supported the Balkan states fighting against the Turkey and in the Balkan Wars. That was like the world wars, and uh, British was fighting against the Balkan states, in which like Turkey was there, where Muslims were worried about their Khilafat. As Turkey was the major Islamic state in Europe and the Muslim community in India saw this as a further example of how the British had no interest in protecting Muslim rights. The Muslims had so little belief in British and that in January 1913 the Muslim League declared that its aim was to force towards the self-government suitable to India. This was the first time that the League passed a resolution calling for self government, and it all now stood beside the Congress in making such demands. The resolution was extremely important in the improving relations with Congress, which now realized that the League was the organization designed to promote support for the British. The impact of the First World War on the Indian subcontinent. When the First World War broke out in Europe in August 1914, there were different views in Indian people. Some were really sympathetic with the British, like as a part of British Empire, and more than 1 million Indians responded to requests to enlist them in the army, and thousands of them gave their lives fighting with the British in Europe, in the Mesopotamia, which is Iraq now. The British themselves said the war would have been like that was and indeed might not even have been won without the help of the Indians. So some of them were really sympathetic, and they even gave their lives in fighting for British. But many politicians in India agreed with the idea of giving support to the British, who said they were fighting for the rights of nations to determine how they were to be governed. So if the British won this war, then surely they would reward Indian loyalty by introducing some reforms to give the Indians um, uh, some role in the government. But some of the Indians were totally not sympathetic with the British, and they saw Britain's necessity as India's opportunity. Like they thought that British was in need of that time, and it was like a kind of opportunity for the Indians to ask any concessions in a reward. In other words, British in difficulty and needed help. So there was more opportunity for Indians to ask for self-government. So the anti-British groups soon began to take in action. So among those actions, one was in 1913 when the Lala Hardayal, who was in exile in America, set up a mutiny party, like a rebelling party, and this party was it sent arms to India and arranged for armed opposition to the British. Like they saw that the British was in a state of war, so that was a weak position for the British. So they sent their arms in to arrange the armed opposition for the British. However, the party's supporters in India were betrayed, and um, um, they were not successful in a battle with Indian police in September 1915. Another action was taken by Indian nationalists who planned an uprising in 1915 in the Punjab, which was easily put down by the British officials. One more action was taken by the Indian troops, and they showed their mutiny, who were serving in the British Army, and these troops were serving in the Singapore, like for the British, but that was again crushed by the British, and dozens of these troops were executed or even imprisoned. Another unsuccessful plot or plan was the Silk Letter Conspiracy. Uh, that was a movement referred to a movement organized by Devbandi leaders. They were Muslims, and between 1913 and 1920, they aimed at freeing India from British rule by forming an alliance with the Ottoman Turkey, Germany, and Afghanistan. However, their plans came to nothing. With all these actions and discontent and chaos in India, British government was now forced to pass the Defence of India Act, which gave extraordinary powers to the government, and they took many steps against the revolutionaries, and some were exiled and even some were imprisoned without any proper trial. So I think this is enough for you today's lecture. And here I'm going to give you an assignment. And your assignment is just one question. Do you agree that the Parliamentary reforms did nothing to improve the position of the Muslims in India? you have to explain your answer, whether you are agreed or not. So you have to do this question in your neat notebook, and this is for 14 marks. Thank you so much, dear students, for watching this video. We'll meet up again with another video. So please take great care of yourselves and stay at home. Inshallah, we'll meet up again. Till then, Allah Hafiz.